Researchers now say almost all teens are spending about 8 to 9 hours a day staring at screens. That includes TV and video games. But new studies are showing what's really taking a toll on their brains is social media.
We have these two studies that were able to uniquely show that social media affected behavior and symptoms over the long term.
One of those studies included nearly 4,000 Canadian adolescents who participated in annual surveys for 5 years. Researchers found social media use is associated with longer-lasting increases in conduct problems.
You would see parallel increases in their tendency to report getting into fights, getting into arguments, acting aggressively.
Patricia Conrad teaches psychiatry at the University of Montreal. She says kids do many things on social media, but it's possible that instead of doing mentally challenging tasks that develop strong cognitive and decision-making skills, teens are spending more time passively scrolling through short, unedited content with few sophisticated messages or storylines.
It's a very passive way of using your brain and doesn't train it to begin to develop some of the cognitive control that you need in order to be a mature decision maker and thinker.
Being on my phone for excessive amounts of time but not really absorbing anything was a very common thing for me.
As a teen, Olivia Miller says she felt anxious, depressed, and addicted to her phone.
When I experienced overwhelming thoughts or feelings, I would go to my phone and I would just find something that would distract me.
33 U.S. states are now suing Facebook and Instagram owner Meta, alleging it knowingly makes social media addictive to children. Whistleblowers say the company's own in-depth research showed a significant teen mental health issue, including boosting suicidal thoughts. Scientists say they know smartphones reduce well-being. The question is, for what groups, by how much, and what can we do about it?
There's really a lack of awareness.
Emma Jordan is trying to answer some of those questions. She's a Canada Research Chair in Neuroscience and Learning Disorders.
Okay, so what do we have here?
So this is the FNIRS cap that we're going to be using today.
She and her team here at Western University are studying how screen time and content can rewire our brain.
As I'm watching this, what are you guys seeing in my brain?
It's telling us which parts of the brain are being activated when you're watching this movie.
So if I were to stop watching this and start scrolling through my phone, would you notice a difference?
Absolutely.
Jordan says screen time can reshape some regions of the brain, especially in young people.
We saw slower brain development in children who've been exposed to high amounts of screen time, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, which are brain regions that are so essential for academic achievement, for learning and memory.
Students are coming to me with concerns that, they can't focus during exams because they're so used to scrolling on TikTok or looking through their phone.
We're finally starting to get the signals that we need to prompt the regulation.
Child psychiatrist Rachel Mitchell says governments need to rein in social media companies, but she says parents also need to talk to their kids about how they're using social media.
Get them to understand or to self-evaluate. How do you feel after 40 minutes versus how do you feel after 2 hours?
Health Canada says online service providers must be held accountable for the harmful content on their platforms, and it will be proposing new laws soon.
I didn't really realize that there were actual strategies in place on social media and phone apps that were keeping me hooked on it.
Miller turned off her notifications and set boundaries for using her phone. Instead of missing out, she now feels like she's taking life in.
We heard from lots of scientists, but what's a parent to do about all of this? Let's check in with Catherine Johnson-Martinko. She's the author of the recent book, Childhood Unplugged, Practical Advice to Get Kids Off Screens and Find Balance, and she is a mom. I know you did a lot of research on this topic for your book. What did you think of what you saw in Christine's story?
I thought that Christine's story was bang on. I mean, all of the points that she brought up were things that I've researched and have been following, especially recently. I think that there's a lot more research coming out lately that's showing the detrimental effects of excessive social media on kids, and it's really great that we're talking about this. We know that teens are spending upwards of 9 hours a day on their phones, and a lot of that is on social media, and there's been huge shifts in the ways that teens are using their time. They're getting less sleep, they're spending less time with other people in person and more time online, and none of this is a great combination for mental health. So another thing that I think is important to think about is what else are they missing out on when they're spending that much time on their devices? They're missing out on real life, and that's something we should be very worried about.
So to quote the subtitle of your book, give us a couple of examples of practical advice to get kids off screens.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm a proponent of delay as being a great strategy. So hold off giving your kid a phone as long as you possibly can. I know that's hard. I do have a kid who's in grade 9. He doesn't have a phone yet, and that is a point of ongoing contention between us. But I just don't think that the benefits outweigh the risks yet at this point. So I think that it's really important to help your teen develop an interesting offline life. So it's one thing to just tell them to get off their devices, but they need to have other things to do. So help to foster different habits and encourage them to have in-person hangouts with their friends. Build independence in your child to get out of the house and do things on their own. You know, a lot of kids are staying home and the parents tend to think that they're safer to be at home on their devices, but in fact, it's much better for them to be out in the world, exploring and expressing themselves. One thing that I tell parents is to limit the screen time severely if you can. So it's okay to have really hard limits of like 1 hour a day. 2 hours absolute maximum is what is considered to be non-detrimental. If your kid does want to be on social media, one good strategy is you can let them have those accounts at a certain age, but that they should only be able to access them on a computer. That way they are not tempted to pick up that phone every single second of the day in their pocket and check on their news feed.
You wrote about your 14-year-old not being allowed to have a smartphone, and I think you said he is or may well be the only kid in his class who doesn't have that phone. So you touched on it, but like, how's it going? Like, we're in November now, and you know, deep into the school year. How does he feel not having that smartphone?
Well, it comes up in conversation for sure. But what's interesting is there's been a lot more discussion this fall about the role of phones in schools. And there's now more and more schools that are choosing to eliminate phones from their schools. They're telling students not to bring them anymore. And so my son is kind of starting to see how much chaos they create in the classroom and how much distraction. We know that teens are really struggling to focus on their lessons. You know, the highest phone users have the lowest grades. That's been shown in studies. So I have told him that even if he had a phone, he would not be allowed to take it to school, which obviously sort of defeats the purpose of having it. You know, over the course of my research, I did talk to teenagers whose parents had restricted their phone use. And these were teens who were, you know, on the other side of high school now. And they were so grateful to their parents for having created those limits. And they said that they struggled to see what a lot of these other teens found so interesting about these tiny devices in their hands all the time. So I do think that there are ways to create more interests and more hobbies and more curiosity about the world when the kids aren't on the devices all the time.
All right. Catherine, thank you very much for going through this with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Catherine Johnson Martinko is an author and a mom.